Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Joree Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Joree is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Joree.
Hi, and welcome back. So there are so many things that I want to be able to share with you during the course of this podcast series, but I really feel like in order for me to continue with all the tools, all the teachings, all my interviews that I'm doing, and most importantly, the life stories that I've had that have gotten me to where I am, that have shaped my experiences, my mindsets, my outlooks, and most importantly, my awarenesses. In order for me to do all that, I must continue to give the foundation of mindfulness and its roots and be able to give a really clear framework from where I'm operating from what I'm teaching, and understand the context and where it's all rooted in. So I felt like it was a really good time to take a few steps back and explain my way of how I teach the fundamentals of mindfulness, which are rooted in Buddhist meditation practice. Now, when I first started teaching mindfulness, I was in a school, and even though it was a private school setting, I maybe had a little bit more freedoms than I might have in a public school. But nonetheless, I was in a school and I had to be really careful in my languaging because there's a lot of times where it can be misunderstood or misinterpreted that Buddhism is teaching a religion. And in a school setting, that can cause a lot of problems. And so I've been very well versed in how to teach mindfulness as a secular practice. And even though I am very secular in my approach and in the words that I choose to use, I still hold very deep roots and honor, and I want to really be able to hold integrity to the roots of, again, where this practice comes from. For example, as far as languaging goes, in a school setting, I would never ever use the word meditation. That could be considered threatening to some people who might think that I am inserting religion into a school setting because, again, people are misunderstood in what the roots of Buddhism really mean. So, for example, like I said, I wouldn't use the word meditation. I would rather call it mindful breathing, which really, when we're in meditation, as I've explained in earlier episodes, that's really all we're doing, is we're breathing with awareness. So that would be one example of how I would have a secular language for describing these very fundamental roots of mindfulness that are based in Buddhist meditation practice. So when I first started getting introduced to mindfulness and meditation, I read a really great book by a woman named Sylvia Boorstein, and she's actually one of the co-founders of Spirit Rock, which is a Buddhist retreat center in Northern California that I actually have the pleasure of visiting whenever I want. It's pretty close to where I live, and I've never been for a residential retreat, but I don't know, I've been at least 15 times for day-long retreats over the years, and beautiful, beautiful teachings and practices and teachers who come through Spirit Rock. But Sylvia, who happens to be Jewish, wrote a book titled Funny, You Don't Look Buddhist. And it was a really, really great framework for me to understand the confusion that people often have when beginning a mindfulness or a meditation practice, because there can easily be fears that practicing these tools is in competition with their own religion. And when you really begin to understand what Buddhism is that it's a way of life. It's a way of being. It's a set of practices where you're not bowing down to one all-being God, but rather a set of tools that have been designed to reduce your suffering and to help you be more present. And as Sylvia so skillfully and filled with humor shares in her book, how actually her Buddhist practice helped her to connect with her religious roots, which, like I said, she was Jewish. And, she gives the example of how often people might be practicing their religion and can be in church or synagogue or wherever it is you go to worship, and how easily it is to say that you're there, but actually you're not present. Maybe your mind has wandered. Maybe you're not paying attention. Maybe you're not focusing on the words or the prayers or the connection of what the religion is teaching. But mindfulness practice can actually help you become more present in whatever you're doing. So again, she had this paradox where her Buddhist practice strengthened her Judaism. And I loved this ability of how to look at, there's no competition in religion. There's no fear of being mindful contradicting any religious beliefs. When you can see it for what it is, it's an ability to be more present with your beliefs because you're connecting to your heart center, you're connecting to your intentions, you're connecting to your presence, all of which does not negate anything that you're being taught in a religious sense. So, I wanted to start off with this concept in case there is anybody who's listening who happens to, have some either unawareness or some fear base around Buddhist practice in fear that it might be in competition with religious beliefs. And I just either want to point you to that resource of that book, which I found to be so helpful, but also to help understand what these roots really are all about. And Buddhism really is a framework, a way of being, like I said, to help reduce your suffering and to help you be more present. And I've probably mentioned before that mindfulness isn't something you add to your to-do list. It's what could be considered to be on your to-be list. Who do you want to be in the world? What is the quality of presence that you want to have as you move through your life, through your day? The quality of presence you bring to your relationships, to your self-care, to your work. How do you tend to your emotions? How do you tend to your thoughts? And this is what we learn from these tools of mindfulness. And so I like to share, actually, this example I got from a really wonderful book. Again, one of my early resources that I read when I was beginning the practice, and it was written by a guy named Noah Levine, and he is somebody who used tools of mindfulness to get out of addiction. The name of Noah's book is called Against the Stream, and he gives a really wonderful description of the story of Buddha and how Buddha became the Buddha. And so I'm going to paraphrase some of the ways that he described it. But the way that I interpret this story is akin to the movie Aladdin. So if you remember Aladdin, the Princess Jasmine was born as a princess into this palatial kingdom. She had no mother, and her father kept her inside the palace walls. Well, the same thing happened with the Buddha. The Buddha, whose name was Siddhartha when he was born into a kingdom with no mother, and his father kept him inside the palace walls because he wanted to protect him from what was on the outside of the walls. And just like Princess Jasmine, and who one day realized I wasn't happy, and she wanted to jump over the walls and see what was on the other side. Well, Siddhartha did the same thing. So he jumped over the palace walls, and what he found were three things. People who were old, people who had disease, and people who were dying. All of which was trying to be protected from him because his father, the king, didn't want him to see suffering. And so when Siddhartha saw that this is what was existing in the world, this was something that at least the extent of death, we are all fated to. Maybe we all don't get to old age, and maybe we don't enter the disease span part of our lives, but death is inevitable. Siddhartha went on a search to figure out how to have an eternal happiness. And he went through a variety of different, month-long meditations, joining different kind of monasteries to see what was the answer. And through lots of trials and tribulations, none of which seemed to be lasting, he sat himself under the Bodhi tree, and he says, I'm not getting up until I've got this all figured out. Now, mind you, this is the condensed version of the story. Like I said, this is the Aladdin version of Jasmine jumping over the wall. So Siddhartha sat himself under the Bodhi tree, says, I'm not getting up until I've got all this figured out. And what he came to was what's called the Four Noble Truths. Noble truth number 1 is that suffering exists. Noble truth number 2 is that there's a cause to suffering. Noble truth number 3, well, if there's a cause, then there must be a way to end the suffering. And noble truth number 4 is what he discovered as the Eightfold Path, which are the ways to end our suffering. One of the 8 is mindfulness practice. So that is a super condensed version of Buddhism 101 and the story of how the Buddha discovered that the way to relieve our suffering is to be in the present moment. Because what he came to understand, and if you don't know, the word Buddha just means awakened one. So we all have that Buddhist nature inside of us. We all have the ability to embrace our Buddha within, to become more awake, more aware, and ultimately more present. So what he discovered is it is when we are not present that we are most suffering. So if we're not present, where are we? Well, our mind wanders to the past or it wanders to the future. Now, when we go to the past, we tend to be stuck in rumination. That's where we play things over and over in our mind. And we tend, because of our negativity bias, as I've described before, because of our negativity bias, we tend to ruminate on the negative. And we tend to replay things in our mind as if we replayed them enough, maybe we could redo them. Why did I say that? Why did that happen? And we get stuck there. And if we get stuck there enough, that can lead to depressive tendencies. When our mind wanders to the future, we get stuck on a whole different kind of thought process, and that tends to be what if. Whenever our mind wanders to the future, we are stuck in fear and often anxiety of the unknown. And sometimes we could try to overthink it so much, and we try to overplan it so much that we prepare ourselves of having this perceived sense of control, that we can, have some greater power in our outcomes. So when our mind wanders to the past and when our mind wanders to the future, we increase our suffering because it inherently takes us out of the present moment. Out of the present moment, that even if the worst case scenario is happening, as I've mentioned before, as long as you're breathing, you're already getting through it. And yet it's when we're out of the present moment that we're increasing our suffering because we're having a difficult time accepting what is. And I'm going to go back to that in just a moment, but a couple of years ago, I was teaching a mindfulness course, and we were talking about this idea of getting stuck in the past and rumination. And someone in the class raised their hand and says, well, what if I'm ruminating on something really positive? What if I'm not stuck on the negative? But what if, like last weekend or last summer, maybe, you're recalling a memory of having been on a wonderful vacation and you're just playing it over in your mind. Or maybe it was a life event. Maybe it was a family wedding, or maybe it was, meeting your loved one where you first started falling in love. All really wonderful memories. So he said to me, why can't I ruminate on the positive? When I thought it was a great question, because the assumption is when we ruminate, we're getting stuck on the negative. Well, the truth of the matter is, as long as we're ruminating in the past, it's taking us out of the present moment, away from what is, making it harder to accept what is, therefore increasing our suffering of the present moment. So even when we're stuck on something positive in the past, it's taking us out of the present, making it harder to be with what is. And I think this is a really good distinction because, any time we're having that wandering mind, we are inadvertently making things harder for ourselves because we're taking us somewhere where we're not right now. So I think that's a really good reminder of one of my favorite quotes, which is, energy flows where intent goes, which means wherever your mind is wandering, if that's where you're giving it attention, that's where you're going to get stuck. And so with mindfulness, we can increase awareness of where that mind has rested and have the tools to bring it back into the present moment. So now this comes up with against a challenge when what do we do when we don't like what's happening in the present moment? We often want to have a wandering mind to self-protect what we don't like. Well, the truth of the matter is not accepting what is, not accepting what's happening in the present moment doesn't make it go away. It creates resistance to it, which makes it harder to accept, making our suffering go up. And so therefore, this fundamental belief, one of the main tools of this fundamental belief of mindfulness rooted in Buddhist practice is acceptance of what is. Radical acceptance is one of the hardest tools to be able to teach, to be able to, I'm not even going to say master because I'm not sure any of us ever fully master it. Maybe we get better at it. Maybe we have enlightened moments around it. But that's an intention that we're working towards. Another fundamental belief in the practice of Buddhism is this idea of non-attachment. And right up there with radical acceptance, I believe non-attachment is one of the hardest things for us to do. So let me share a personal story about this. About 5 years ago, I was going through separation and then divorce. And my daughter was 8 years old at the time, my youngest daughter. And during this time period, she was having her birthday and she was turning 9. And my ex had moved out. And as had been tradition for her and my other daughter's birthday every year, we had always gotten together with my husband's family for whosever birthday it was. So it was the night before she was to go to her dad's and go out for her birthday with his family. And she said to me, "Mom, what are you doing tomorrow night?" And I told her I was having dinner with a friend. And she said to me, "Well, I wanted you to come to dinner. We're going out with Dad and his family for my birthday, and I wanted you to come." And I looked at her and with a whole lot of compassion and sadness in my heart, I said to her, "Well, sweetie, I don't think I was invited." And she looked at me with her eyes wide and honest and said, "Well, Mom, I just invited you." And I said, "Well, this year I don't think I can come. It wasn't appropriate since we were in the midst of this separation." And she got sad and says, "Well, why does it have to be different than last year?" And I said, "Well, here's another fundamental belief in Buddhist practice, is that the most constant thing is change." And I explained to her that not everything could be the same forever. And the more that we expect things to be the same, again, the more it increases our suffering, because when things do change, we get attached to the way it was, making it harder to accept what is. And I explained to her this idea of non-attachment, that the more we get attached to certain ways of doing things or thoughts or belief systems, the harder it is to be flexible when they do change. And I explained to her that I was recently at a conference in which they had monks who throughout the entire weekend of the conference made a sand mandala. Now, if you've never seen a sand mandala, it's pretty amazing. And in fact, if you go look at the show notes, I've uploaded a photo for you to be able to refer to and see around what the sand mandala looks like. And if for whatever reason, if whatever device you're on and it doesn't end up working out that you can see a photo, just type in sand mandala or, Buddhist meditation sand mandala. So these about 3 or 4 monks spent 3 days creating this mandala that was on a table about 6 feet in diameter. And it's a meditation for them to, it was basically paint by numbers. This table had numbers on it. There were all different colors of sand. And the traditional practice of how they put these colored sand in this long tube and then scraped the tube so the sand came out at a certain speed. And they would chant while doing this. And they made this beautiful design, something like I'd never seen before. And it wasn't even flat. Like some of the sand was raised higher and dimensional and had tips and points too. It was just beautiful. As soon as they were done with the mandala, after 3 days, they then performed a ceremony in which they destroyed it. And it just seems mind-boggling that as soon as they would create this beautiful piece of work, to get rid of it. And the whole reason they did this ceremony is because it's a practice in non-attachment. And in explaining to my daughter why I couldn't go with her to dinner for her birthday, I showed her this video of the monks destroying this beautiful sand mandala, explaining that the more attached we are to the way things are, the harder to accept it when they change. And at 9 years old, or almost 9 at that point, she was very, very aware. She understood exactly what I was teaching her, and yet it was still really hard for her to accept. And without missing a beat, she looks at me and she says, "Mom, how can I have non-attachment? I've had almost 9 years of attachment with my family, and you're telling me just because it's different now to not be attached to my family? How can I do that?" And she was right. After 9 years of attachment, how do you just let it go? But in reality, holding on to it, resisting the change, was going to make it worse. And so that's where the radical acceptance comes in. This is where these fundamental beliefs and tools in mindfulness can really help us in our everyday challenges and struggles and ways of being. And so, to understand that these are the roots of the tools of this practice, this is why we practice. So when things get hard, we can have an ability to be able to observe it and increase our awareness around it and look at it and say, wow, this is really painful right now. And I understand I'm increasing my own suffering by staying stuck in the way things were, making it hard to accept the way things are. So I'm going to stop there for now. There's so much more I want to share about these fundamentals of the mindfulness practice and how it's rooted in Buddhism. And I will continue on. So tune in for the next episode where I will share some more of these fundamental belief systems to help continue to give the framework for all the tools, all the stories, all of my own personal awarenesses and aha moments, and just how much having this as a framework has helped me not only make sense of where I'm stuck and why I'm struggling, but also to be able to see the patterns of where I can get unstuck, to be able to see with great wisdom why something is clearly so hard. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope that something here resonated with you, and I hope that you are able to start to look at these tools and how you can relate them to your own life and how you can start to reduce your own suffering by noticing some of these patterns. And like I said, tune in for next time and we'll share some more. All right, take care. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
To continue your journey forward, find Joree Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joreerose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.